Before we get into the video, could everyone please subscribe to my Endless Diary Tales channel? Thank you so much. Congratulations, Luna. I heard your family got a 3-bedroom apartment this time. Luna, you really have amazing luck. The envious whispers buzzed around me. I closed the courtyard door behind me, their voices still lingering in the air. As soon as I entered, I went straight to Ryan's room. Taking a deep breath, I opened the desk drawer with trembling hands. Inside, a square metallic tin for mooncakes. I found my stash of money, still untouched. I counted it carefully, exactly $900, not a cent more or less. In my previous life, Emma used this money to buy an apartment, and 10 years later, she achieved financial freedom. But this time I planned to be bolder. I would take this money and head south. Ryan and I were originally set to get married on the 18th of next month, according to the lunar calendar. But in this life, that wedding will never happen. I tucked the money close to me, preparing to leave when I overheard voices outside the door. Startled, I hurried back to my own room. Ryan, are you really giving me your apartment buying quota? A woman's voice, clear and filled with disbelief and joy, reached my ears. I froze. In my past life, I only knew that Emma had used Ryan's money to buy her apartment. I hadn't realized that even the purchasing quota came from him. My eyes burned as I bit my lip hard. You and your son living under someone else's roof need this apartment more than I do, Ryan replied softly, his tone gentle, completely unlike the indifferent way he spoke to me. I listened as Emma thanked him profusely, her excitement evident. Then she hesitated. But even if I have the quota, I might not be able to afford it. Ryan didn't immediately reply. You know how it is, Ryan. My son is still young, and raising him is expensive. With just odd jobs here and there, I haven't saved up much. Her words hung in the air for a moment before Ryan finally said, I'll figure out the money. Don't worry about it. After a few more polite refusals from Emma, the two of them left. Only then did I emerge from my room. In my past life, when I heard that Emma had earned hundreds of thousands from the apartment she bought, I had been genuinely envious. Back then, Ryan had only made a dismissive remark as he ate his meal. It's just fate. If it's not meant for you, don't bother wishing for it. I had believed him, thinking Emma's good fortune was simply destiny. How was I to know that her good fortune was actually Ryan's sacrifices, along with mine, handed over to her? If not for Emma's slip of the tongue in my previous life, admitting that Ryan had helped her buy that apartment, I would have died clueless. How deep must his love for her have been? Deep enough to willingly let himself, me, and even our child live crammed into a 300-square-foot apartment while gifting money and a home to her. And then he had the audacity to tell me it was just fate. When the two of them had finally left, I sat silently in the room for a long time. By dusk, I went into Ryan's room, retrieved the mooncake tin, and placed it on the dining table. That evening I made chicken soup and steamed a large pot of rice for myself. After eating, I opened the tin. Inside, besides my money, there was also Ryan's 2 years of savings, exactly $2.60. Additionally, I found his workplace housing purchase certificate and some receipts for daily expenses. When Ryan returned, he saw the open tin and frowned. What are you doing with that? He asked irritably. In the past, I would have rushed to greet him with a smile as soon as he came home. Ryan was an impressive-looking man, tall and well-educated. After graduating from university, he worked at a research institute. I had been utterly satisfied with him as my fiancé, even wholeheartedly in love. But reality had proven me wrong. It was only today that I learned my father had borrowed money from a few colleagues. Back then, I planned to use some of this money to pay them back. First, my mother passed away early, and my father was a middle school teacher. He was always dedicated and selfless, especially toward his students. Ryan was one of them. Back then, Ryan's family was struggling, and my father not only tutored him for free, but also secretly slipped him pocket money several times. In fact, some of Ryan's high school tuition was covered by my father. Ryan wasn't the only student my father helped, of course, so despite being a teacher all his life, my father barely saved any money. Sometimes, when there were big expenses at home, he even had to borrow from his colleagues. When I mentioned this, Ryan didn't suspect a thing. How much is still owed? He asked after a pause. $3,100, I replied evenly. How could it be that much? Ryan said instinctively. The IOUs are in there, I said, pretending to stand up. He quickly waved me off. That won't be necessary. I trust you. After a moment he hesitated and asked, can we delay the repayment for a while? I glanced at him without replying. Of course, I knew what he was planning, to give that money to Emma. I almost laughed at the absurdity. Dream on. I was preparing to head south to start fresh, and I couldn't leave without money. Ryan didn't dare take the money back. He simply said, keep the box here for now, before leaving. After he was gone, I retrieved my father's account book. My father might have been overly generous, but at least he had a habit of recording every expense. I carefully went through it and listed every penny he had spent on Ryan over the years. The total shocked me. Beyond covering Ryan's high school tuition and living expenses, my father had also helped him during college. When I added it all up, it came to over $2,800. That was the equivalent of 3 years of my father's salary if he didn't spend a single penny on himself. I took $2,800 out of the money Ryan had saved in the mooncake tin. As for the remaining $200 or so, I decided to consider it a loss. I carefully hid the money, planning to return the tin to Ryan tomorrow. What's rightfully mine I'll take without guilt, but what isn't mine I won't touch. Not even a cent. The next morning, as I was making breakfast, I heard voice coming from outside caught my attention while I was stirring rice in the pot. Her sobbing was unmistakable. They're too much. How could they hit you? She cried. My hand froze. I stepped out of the kitchen and saw Emma, her eyes red and swollen, her long hair draped over her shoulders. She looked small and pitiful, practically curled into Ryan's arms. What's going on here? I asked, my voice cutting through the scene. Hearing me, Emma quickly turned her head and wiped her tears before glancing at me. Don't misunderstand, Luna. I didn't want to bother anyone, so I came to see Ryan. The three of us had known each other since childhood. 10 years ago, most of the homes here were still wooden, and families lived close together back then. Ryan and Emma lived in the same courtyard and often played together as kids. Then came the fire. That fire, though it didn't claim any lives, burned several streets worth of houses to the ground. Afterward, everyone rebuilt their homes separately. Emma eventually married a tailor's apprentice, but was widowed shortly after, nearly losing her mind from grief. It was with Ryan's help that she managed to return to her family home. When Ryan said Emma was living under someone else's roof, he meant that after moving back, Emma often clashed with her sister-in-law. Each time, she would run to Ryan for help, and he always stepped in, taking care of everything. Looking back now, it was laughable that in my previous life, I genuinely believed Ryan only saw Emma as a sister. Ryan's about to get married, I said coldly. You throwing yourself into his arms like that isn't appropriate. People might think you're planning to remarry, I added pointedly. And you know, being a widow, remarrying isn't exactly a great reputation to have. Even though I had no intention of continuing this engagement, I couldn't help but jab at her. Emma's expression shifted immediately, and she instinctively glanced at Ryan. Ryan frowned and scolded me. What nonsense are you talking about? I let out a sneer and ignored both of them, returning to the kitchen to finish cooking. The sound of Emma's crying resumed outside, mixed with Ryan's attempts to comfort her. It went on for quite a while before things finally quieted down. After breakfast, I went to the factory where I worked as a quality inspector. I had been assigned to this job after graduating from high school. The factory was doing well enough now, but I knew that within a few years economic conditions would worsen, and the factory would face restructuring. That was when I had been laid off in my previous life. Coming back this time, I was well aware that the factory's profits were already in decline, even if most people hadn't realized the severity of the situation yet. I planned to sell my job quota while it still had value. Fortune favors the bold. Those who dared to take risks during the early days of economic reform reaped the rewards. Back then, becoming a 10,000 wasn't just a title, it was a badge of success. However, finding the right buyer for my quota would take some careful consideration. On my way home after work, I found myself wandering near the plot of land where, in my previous life, Emma had bought her apartment. Right now, It was still an overgrown field of weeds, but within 3 years, towering high-rises would spring up here, and a decade later, property prices would have multiplied countless times. In my previous life, Emma had secured her future with that apartment. This time, without the money to buy it, she would have no connection to it. When I got home, I was surprised to see Ryan there. He had never been one to spend time in the kitchen, yet he had prepared several dishes. "You're back. Go wash up. It'll be ready soon," he said casually. Having someone else cook was fine by me, so I didn't object. Dinner was unexpectedly lavish, with meat, vegetables, and even fish. It was clear he had spent a lot on this meal, but it didn't take long for his true intentions to show. As we began eating, Ryan's expression grew hesitant, as though he wanted to say something but couldn't find the words. I kept my head down, eating silently, as though I hadn't noticed. Ryan wasn't used to me ignoring him like this. He fidgeted, trying to start a conversation but unable to figure out how. Before he could speak, Emma showed up again. The wind outside was strong, and Ryan, ever considerate, invited her in and handed her a cup of hot tea. Emma sat down, her face bright with happiness as she thanked me. "Thank you so much for agreeing to let me have the housing quota, and even lending me money to buy the apartment." I glanced at her, feigning ignorance. "What quota? What housing quota?" Emma froze, her smile faltering as unease crept into her expression. She stood up nervously and looked at Ryan. "Ryan," she stammered, "does your fiancé not know you gave me the housing quota?" Ryan remained silent, his eyes on me. Emma's eyes gleamed with satisfaction, but her tone remained apologetic. "Oh dear, Ryan, I know you care about me and my son, but you really should have discussed such a big decision with your future wife. Even if you're not married yet, it's still your property to handle." "Oh, look at me, I've said too much. I'll take my leave now. Goodbye, Ryan. Goodbye, Luna." Ryan comforted her softly. "It's fine, it's my decision to make. Don't worry about it." After she left, I continued eating my meal calmly, showing no reaction. It wasn't until I finished the last bite and stood to leave that Ryan finally spoke. "Luna, can we talk?" I sat back down, my expression indifferent. He hesitated before saying, "I'm sorry, but could we delay repaying the money for now?" "No," I said firmly. My refusal left no room for negotiation. If he chose to pay willingly, that was fine, but if he tried to take the money back, well, we would see. I took out my father's account book. Since the money was in my hands now, Ryan could forget about using it to fill the bottomless pit that was Emma's life. "And about this so-called housing quota," I said sharply. "You gave a housing quota to an outsider, Ryan. What do you? Isn't this something important enough to at least discuss with me?" Sure, the housing quota was technically his, but he hadn't said a word to me about it. In my previous life, he had even taken my salary and handed it over to her without a second thought. It was clear to me now that my worth in his eyes wasn't even comparable to a patch of grass. "The housing quota is useless to us right now," Ryan said defensively. "Giving it to Emma isn't a big deal. She's living with her son under her sister-in-law's thumb. Can you really just stand by and watch her suffer? It's just a quota. It's not even yours. Why are you making such a fuss?" I nodded slowly, a bitter smile tugging at my lips. "Fine, you're right. It's not mine. You can give it to whoever you want. It has nothing to do with me." I stood up, unwilling to say another word to him, but Ryan wasn't finished. "We can take our time repaying your father's debts," he said as though it were a perfectly reasonable suggestion. "Emma, however, can't wait. Give me the money and I'll send it to her." He reached out his hand as if it were the most natural thing in the world. I went back to my room and retrieved the mooncake tin. Ryan's eyes lit up, thinking I had caved, but when he opened the lid, all he found were receipts in my father's account book. "What is this?" he asked, confused. I motioned for him to take a look. Ryan's face darkened as he flipped through the pages. By the time he reached the end, his expression was grim. "What is the meaning of this?" he demanded. I pulled out a small notebook where I had meticulously recorded all the money my father had spent on him over the years. Turning to the last page, I pointed to the total. "In these years, my father spent over $2.8 million on you," I said flatly. Ryan took a deep breath. "So what, are you asking me to repay it now?" I nodded. If you want to frame it that way, fine. Think what you want, but let me be clear. You will not use this money to help Emma. According to these records, you still owe me over $200. I had thought about forgiving the small remainder, but now I've changed my mind. My father has passed, and I refuse to let people gossip about him being taken advantage of. Ryan looked at me in disbelief. You're actually calculating everything down to the last penny? I can't believe you do this. I smiled coldly. Clear accounts make for honest relationships, don't they? Even Ryan had nothing to say to that. Luna, he said finally, his voice low. I didn't expect you to be so calculating. Do you still want to go through with the wedding next month? He was trying to threaten me. My eyes burned, but I refused to let the tears fall. Ryan had always been so respectful and obedient in front of my father. After graduating, he had done well for himself at work. 2 years ago, when my father fell critically ill, he had worried about who would take care of me after he was gone. Ryan had promised to marry me and look after me for the rest of my life. At the time, I had never expressed my feelings for him, but his words and his support. During those difficult days after my father's death, I had fallen for him completely. Now, though he was threatening me for Emma's sake, I let out a bitter laugh. Did he really think I couldn't live without him? If you want to call off the wedding, I'm perfectly fine with that, I said evenly. Ryan hadn't expected me to agree so readily. He froze, caught off guard. Before he could respond, I smiled. But if you're so concerned about Emma, helping her doesn't necessarily mean you have to buy her a house. After all, money isn't the solution right now. Ryan frowned. What do you mean? I chuckled. Her sister-in-law targets her because she's seen as a freeloader. If I give her my job, not only will she have a steady income, but she'll also have childcare. Wouldn't that be even better? Ryan was still trying to process what I had said, his face a mix of confusion and hesitation. I'm not that kind-hearted, I said calmly, but you can trade your housing quota for my job. Ryan thought about it for 2 days before reluctantly agreeing. Although Emma couldn't buy a house, she now had a stable job. With that, her troubles at her family's home were essentially resolved, and she seemed genuinely happy. Ryan was pleased too. As for me, the day I received the housing quota, I immediately spent $1 to purchase the property. The thought of turning $1 into millions in the future thrilled me. Ryan assumed I gave my job to Emma to better prepare for our wedding next month, so he didn't think much of it. What he didn't know was that I had already bought a train ticket to the south and planned to leave tomorrow. When Ryan came home that evening, I had just finished packing my belongings. Why are you packing so much? He asked, noticing the bundles. Since I hadn't cooked, Ryan went into the kitchen and made 3 simple dishes and a soup. I stuffed my bags into the cabinet, replying casually, too much stuff, just organizing. Ryan brought me a bowl of soup and, after some hesitation, pulled out a small stack of money from his pocket. Emma just started her new job. I lent her $50. Here's $30 for you. I paused briefly before accepting the $30 without hesitation. While the larger portion had gone to someone else, this was money he owed my father. Taking it didn't weigh on my conscience. Dinner was quiet and awkward. Neither of us spoke much. Ryan glanced at me and cleared his throat. Don't worry, he said. After we're married, you can stay at home and focus on running the household. I'll hand over my wages to you every month. You'll be in charge. As he said this, his ears turned red, and there was a rare hint of expectation in his expression. I let out a small laugh. And what about next month? Won't you need to lend your sister money again? I couldn't resist the jab. Ryan looked at me puzzled. She has a job now. Why would I still need to lend her money? I couldn't find the words to respond immediately, but it didn't matter. After I left, whether Ryan and Emma ended up together or he married someone else, none of it would have anything to do with me. Before Ryan brought out a stack of red invitations and asked me who we should invite to the wedding, I glanced at the bright red invitations and lowered my head. It's up to you, I said flatly. Back in my room, I bolted the door. I hadn't packed much, just 2 sets of clothes. I had sewn most of my money and important items into the collars and cuffs of my garments, while the rest was wrapped and hidden in my socks. I'd rather have money that carried an odor than arrive at my destination penniless. I was just about to fall asleep when Ryan unexpectedly knocked on my door. Annoyed, I opened it to find him standing there with a polished wooden box in his hands. "What's this?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "Surprise. Come here," he said, reaching out to pull me forward. I instinctively stepped back. Ryan froze, then withdrew his hand and pushed the box toward me instead. His gaze was cautious, almost expectant. I took the box and opened it under his watchful eyes. Inside was a pair of silver bracelets, 2 gold rings, and a jade bangle. I stared at the items, my emotions complicated. In my previous life, Ryan had never given me these things. I remembered vividly that many years later, after our child had grown up, I found this box in his study. When I opened it out of curiosity, Ryan had immediately snapped the lid shut in front of me, his expression filled with displeasure. "These are things my mother left behind," Ryan explained. "They're meant for the future daughter-in-law of the family. Don't touch them carelessly." In my previous life, the jade bangle among these items had somehow ended up in Emma's hands. Now I realized these things had already been in Ryan's possession all along. What I couldn't figure out was why he was willing to give them to me now when, in the past, even until my death, I had never seen them. I couldn't help but mock myself internally. Was it because I gave my job to Emma? Did he think I still had some use? And that this was his way of thanking me? How laughable. I didn't care for these things in the slightest. "Here, let me put this on you," Ryan said, his face slightly flushed as he picked up the jade bangle. "Pull my hand back. We're not married yet. It's not appropriate for me to take these," I said. Ryan froze, staring at my indifferent expression, a flicker of unease crossing his face. He had thought I would be overjoyed to see these items, knowing how much significance they held for the family. He never expected me, who used to care so much about him, to now act like I didn't care at all. "Luna, is something bothering you?" he asked cautiously. I looked at him calmly. What could possibly bother me? I just don't care for these things anymore. I turned away. "Take them back," I said flatly, closing the door behind me. Even late into the night, I could still hear the sound of him pacing back and forth outside my door. The next morning, Ryan had already left by the time I got up. I grabbed my bags and boarded the slow green train heading south. The journey took 2 days and 1 night. The train was packed with people at every stop. Local vendors crowded the platform, selling snacks, fruits, and other food. I had a window seat, but I couldn't bring myself to splurge on the boxed meals sold on the train. Instead, I opted for simple steamed buns and peanuts from the villagers outside. Aside from occasional bathroom trips, I barely left my seat. By the time I finally got off at the bus station in North City, I discovered that my bag and the pockets of my clothes had been slashed open. Fortunately, the pockets only contained a few small bills meant as a decoy, so the loss was minimal. However, being in an unfamiliar place, I nearly got dragged into shady motels near the train station by overly aggressive touts. I silently shook them off, clutching my bag tightly, and eventually found a seat in a hospital corridor to rest. The next day, following the directions of a hospital security guard, I rented a small room in a nearby residential house. My first job was working as a shop assistant at a wholesale market. Starting from knowing nothing, I quickly learned how to assist the big buyers who came to pick up goods. In just 2 months, I became adept at handling inventory and fulfilling orders. Over time, I noticed that while there were many stores in the market selling clothes, shoes, and socks, the competition was fierce. Popular items often sold out quickly, and if a shop didn't have enough stock, customers would simply go elsewhere. On the other hand, if they overstocked and the items didn't sell, the unsold inventory would pile up, becoming a financial burden. My boss frequently faced such issues. On the surface, the business seemed to involve large transactions, moving lots of goods and making big profits, but in reality, the surplus inventory often outweighed the earnings. By the end of the year, it wasn't uncommon for them to make little to no profit while being stuck with unsellable items. After observing this pattern in many nearby shops, I began to formulate a plan. I carefully calculated my initial $2,500 and the wages I had earned over the past year. Finally, I approached my boss with a proposal. After some negotiation, I bought a large batch of surplus inventory at a deeply discounted price. By this time, South City and the coastal areas were beginning to develop rapidly, and trendy, fashionable clothing was becoming very popular. In contrast, the inland areas like ours were lagging behind, due to the long distance and underdeveloped logistics networks. Fashionable, trendy clothes were still incredibly rare. If I could bring these items back ahead of others, they would undoubtedly sell well. However, getting the clothes was one thing. Transporting them back home was another challenge entirely. I visited several shipping companies at the wholesale market, but none had routes to my city. Refusing to give up, I spent several more days searching and finally found a company willing to deliver to my town after a lot of negotiating, and an additional payment. For $300, they agreed to extend their route by an extra hour to deliver the goods. Once I sent everything off through logistics, I packed up my belongings and started my journey back home. This time, the trip was even more crowded as it was close to the end of the year. The train was packed with people returning home, far more than during my previous trip. Yet, unlike before, I felt no anxiety, even when an older woman tried to fight me from my seat, or when someone cut the strap of my small bag and stole it without me noticing. I remained unfazed. Finally arriving at the station, I rented a ground floor room on a busy street in our city. Days later, I hired a tricycle to retrieve my goods, and soon after, I set up a street stall in high-traffic areas. Over the past year working in sales in North City, I had gained a good understanding of different types of customers. Who had money, who was picky, and who loved to bargain. Wealthy customers got recommendations for high-quality, well-tailored clothing. For the picky ones, I let them try on as many pieces as they wanted without a hint of impatience. For the bargain hunters, I prepared extras like socks and gloves to offer as free gifts for bulk purchases. This often encouraged them to buy even more. As the year drew to a close, more and more people were buying clothes, and my trendy styles became increasingly popular. Even shopkeepers from nearby stores came over to secretly observe my inventory. Soon, I had sold every piece of clothing I brought back, as well as scarves, socks, and hair accessories. By the time I finished selling, I had earned nearly $10, almost becoming a 10,000-aire. After the new year, I didn't rush to restock clothes. The post-holiday season was typically a slow time for fashion sales, and bringing in new inventory now would likely result in unsold stock piling up. Instead, with the money I had made, I purchased 5 more properties in the same residential complex as my earlier investment. With the remaining funds, I headed back to South City and started selling electrical appliances, knowing that weddings in our area were beginning to embrace the trend of 3 essentials and 1 luxury: a bicycle, sewing machine, watch, and radio. I focused on those items. Radios, in particular, were so popular that finding one sometimes required sheer luck or perfect timing. Over the next 6 months, I worked tirelessly, and by the end of August, I secured a significant commission from a large order. Combining that with my previous earnings and savings, I invested everything into a shipment of radios and related items. When the goods arrived, they sold even better than the clothes from the previous year. I didn't deal in major brands, but the profit margin for each radio was close to $1. With additional items like cassette tapes, radios became my best-selling products. As the saying goes, gold in September, silver in October. These 2 months brought in record profits. Later, I made another trip, capitalizing on the rush of people eager to buy gifts for newlyweds or to celebrate the new year. That wave brought in another round of significant earnings. Even during the Lunar New Year, my business thrived. By this point, I had established strong relationships with suppliers and logistics companies in South City. Running out of stock no longer required me to travel in person. I could simply make a phone call, wire the payment, and have the goods delivered to me within days. With the scale of my business growing, operating as a small-time street vendor was no longer viable. I rented a spacious triple-unit storefront in the busiest commercial district. In addition to the storefront, I also rented a large ground floor space for wholesale operations. Wholesale didn't bring in as much profit per item as retail, but the sheer volume of transactions more than made up for it. As demand grew, I hired 3 additional salespeople to help manage the workload while I focused on expanding the business even further. One can't get by without some knowledge, right? Ryan, we're getting married. Forget about a wedding banquet. But are you really unwilling to even buy me a sewing machine? The familiar voice made me instinctively glance toward the store entrance. There Emma was, holding back tears, clutching her son's hand as she confronted Ryan. 2 years had passed and Ryan seemed different. Once distant and composed, like an untouchable figure, he now appeared haggard, his face pale and darkened with exhaustion. If I wasn't mistaken, there were even streaks of gray in his hair. Sensing my gaze, Ryan instinctively turned to look at me. The moment our eyes met, he froze. "Luna," he murmured, his voice barely audible. Emma frowned and followed his line of sight. When she saw me, her expression shifted briefly, and she averted her eyes. Then, as if emboldened by some thought, she raised her head and puffed out her chest. "Oh, isn't this Luna? Are you working here now?" One of my employees was about to respond but stopped when they saw my expression. Emma, recovering her composure, withdrew her anger and forced a smile. She grabbed Ryan's stiff arm and walked over to me. She adjusted her hair casually. "It's been a while, Luna." I smiled faintly. "Out shopping?" Ryan's eyes widened as his mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. Emma shot him a sharp glare before addressing me with a smile. "Oh, Luna, you probably don't know, but Ryan and I are already married." I nodded slightly. "Congratulations. Shopping for wedding essentials, I see?" Emma gave a modest nod, and then dragged me along to browse the store. Under my polite compliments and admiring gaze, she eventually bought a radio, a sewing machine, and a color TV. The color TV was one of the newest and most expensive items in my store. To commemorate this special reunion, I decided to charge an extra. "Enjoy your meal. I'll leave first." I pulled out a $100 bill, handed it to the vendor, and left without looking back. We all lived in the same area, so I was well aware of what Emma's family was like. They were worse than vampires, sucking the life out of everything. When Emma got married, her family accepted a hefty bride price, but didn't even send a blanket as part of her dowry. Naturally, her in-laws looked down on her, and her married life quickly descended into chaos. That's why she ended up back at her parents' house. Ryan had known all this but had been blinded by his feelings for her, seeing everything she did through rose-colored glasses. Now, with her family leeching off him, he finally understood what it meant to be trapped, but it was too late. After that, Ryan came to see me a few more times. Each time, he hesitated and seemed on the verge of saying something but never did. It was exhausting and frustrating. In the end, I had enough. I decided to invite Emma over, and made Ryan wait nearby. Facing Ryan directly, I asked, "What exactly do you want from me?" Ryan seemed to struggle with himself for a long moment before finally looking up at me, his face full of determination. "Luna," he said, his voice faltering, "I want to say that I do. Do you think we still have a chance?" Ryan asked, his voice trembling. I sneered, my tone sharp and unapologetic. "You're married. Are you seriously trying to string me along now?" "It wasn't my choice," he blurted. "I was set up. I can divorce her." Ryan shot to his feet, his agitation clear. "She's just a divorced woman with a child. If she hadn't clung to me, do you think I'd ever have married her? Ever since I've been with her, people have been mocking me, saying I'm playing stepdad for cheap. They say I threw away a watermelon to pick up a pair of discarded shoes no one wanted." Before Ryan could finish, there was a sharp yell. A figure burst into the room. "I'll kill you, you shameless bastard!" Emma shrieked, lunging at him. "What's wrong with me having a child? Is he eating your food or taking your name? Calling me discarded shoes? What does that make you? Some moldy cucumber no one wants? And don't act so self-righteous. If I'd known you couldn't even last 3 seconds, I might have died before marrying you." The room devolved into chaos as Emma's voice rang out, accompanied by the sounds of scuffling and shouting. Meanwhile, I calmly put on my sunglasses and walked away. Life is long, and perhaps their pain was only just beginning. But as for me, I was grateful I had escaped long ago.